Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up. Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up. Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
Hello, Ben.
Hi, Jeremy. Happy Friday.
Yes, happy Friday, indeed. I'm a bit demob happy because I'm off next week. Well, off a bit. So,
Good.
yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's holiday time.
It is indeed. Weather's been good. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at everything to do with the London market, technology, change. And this week we've got an interview with Professor John Seddon about his thoughts around digital technology and change, but we'll get on to that later. But to kick things off, as always, let's start with the news. I'm going to start first, Ben, and I wanted to kick off with the news of the Olympics because it is starting right now, I think.
I know.
This second, we are clashing with it. They haven't even let us know that it was going to happen then. But
it's a bit disappointing, that, isn't it?
It is. I don't understand why they didn't let us know. But yeah, so that's going ahead right now. And
But it'll be damaging them, Jeremy.
Yes, it will. All the
hitting
viewers.
them hard, their media. It's another problem for them.
Yeah, and they have been beset by problems even up till yesterday. But I really hope that it's a good experience for the athletes and everyone else. I was watching quite a good BBC documentary about the build-up to the 2012 games in London and all the problems they have. And in the press, you know, will the stadiums be built? It was over budget by billions of pounds and all the rest of it. And then in the end, it did all come good. So.
Which is very typical, isn't it, of the Olympics? It is the narrative for all Olympic Games is they're not going to build it. It's going to be a disaster. The diving boards and the swimming pools won't work. The swimming pools will have some problem with the chlorine or whatever they put in nowadays.
Yeah, it's true. But I bet Seb Coe's sitting at home going, God, I'm so glad I'm not part of that.
I know. Well, nobody's going. I mean, none of the dignitaries or the sponsors. So that's tells you everything.
It's tough, isn't it? Tough. But I'm hoping for some good stuff. Road cycling tomorrow, so at least we kick off.
Yeah.
We know. So that's good.
We're doing our competition next week.
Oh yeah, we're doing a competition next week. We're going to go on. You.
Okay, so what we'd like to do, well, Jeremy and I are going to do it, and if anybody wants to join in. Even through today and next week, because it'll be a pre-record next week, I think, is your top favourite Olympic events, the ones you think are just the best. You know, things like gymnastics, we know it's going to be in there. And then your events that you think, your bottom 4 or 5 events you think are just ridiculous, shouldn't be in there at all. And there's always new ones, so there's plenty of scope for your best and worst.
Definitely. I'll keep my powder dry. I can already name a few that I can't stand. But
pentathlon. Modern pentathlon. I'll just chuck that in.
Yeah, it's up there, isn't it?
Horse riding and shooting. Well, I used to do it at my school. Ridiculous.
Yeah, there we are. Right. Let's move things on. So we do have some real news and big news this week. BM leaving Hiscox. I think you picked this up, Ben.
Yeah. Big Bronick.
Yeah. Here we go.
Huge figure in the insurance market for the last 20 years. Took on the heavy, I think, responsibility of Hiscox, and has announced that he's leaving, with the brave choice of putting the CFO in charge, which, actually, guess what? Andrew Horton was CFO and he did a brilliant job. So I shouldn't cast aspersions, but I do sometimes think when you put a CFO in, it's not that brave. But anyway, back to Bronick. I have to say, I think I agree with the accolades that he's received. I think he's generally been a fantastic representative and advocate for the market. He's different, really, Bronick, in lots of ways. He's quite down to earth. He's not one of the sort of loads of money types you can get in insurance, and I like him for that. I think he's pretty down to earth. He's had a tough couple of years, no doubt, and through COVID, which we won't dwell on, because I think it's not about that. I think it's about what he's done, and then for Hiscox to take it forward after this. I think he's had a good period, and he's really grown that business to be something very successful.
Yeah, I've only met him a few times, and I've heard him speak at our events and at other events as well. And he very much, along the themes that we touch on this show around change and transformation, the importance of people development. I heard him do a great talk in the Lloyd's Library a few years ago now, but he was talking about kind of advice that he'd been given that has stayed with him through his career, and it was all around people and how you treat people and listening to people as well. So yeah, it's a big change at the top for Hiscox.
And I hope he does something else, because he's only coming up for 60, so he's got a few years, and he could contribute. But I know he's got, they always talk about this, he's got lots of sort of other sporty interests and things like that. So maybe he'll just decide to leave the insurance industry altogether.
Yep, we shall wait and see. Okay, so what else have we got? We've got news from, it's Aon Towers Watson, isn't it? Back in it's never out the news, is it? But this is quite an interesting story, isn't it? How they've narrowed the focus of the antitrust suit.
Yes.
And on the face of it, it kind of this might be a good thing, but you think it's not.
No, I think when you see something saying it's narrowed the focus, and I first read this, I thought, oh, well, that means it's maybe going to be less important. But actually, in a way, I think this makes it more focused, really, on something. So what it's really focusing on is whether large US businesses would face diminished competition when seeking two categories of insurance: property casualty and financial risk coverage, and health and benefit coverage for employees. So two very different categories. And so they're going to judge it on that base. Old Reggie's back, Reggie Walton. He's going to be doing it.
We love Reggie. Can we get a picture of Reggie for next week?
I will do. We'll get a picture of Reggie. He's
I've got a mental image in my mind, and I'm pretty sure it's not what he really looks like.
Don't know. Yeah. Anyway, the issue, I think, is that it's focused very much on real competitive examples, and could really set a precedent for the whole insurance industry over these types of mergers going forward. So I don't suppose people who are not in Aon or Willis at the moment will be relishing any of this that comes out, because it will potentially block or make deals quite difficult in the future at this level if it goes through. Even if it doesn't, I think the whole debate will not stop. So I think the court has set it up in such a way as to say this isn't going to end even if we don't win this one. Yeah.
Again, we'll continue to watch this, but it develops, and there's always unintended consequences of these things when it gets into the legal sphere, as we've talked about with the BI stuff, and we will at London Market Claims as well in October.
Yeah.
So also following on from last week, we focused on ESG, and we talked quite a lot about the complex and wide-ranging nature of ESG. And this week again, we see the wildfires in the US and the floods in Europe, which I'll come to in a minute. But yes, it's really interesting about how the insurance industry is going to react to some of this stuff.
Yeah, it's a really good article, this by S&P, just analysing the US wildfires. And I've seen a few like this. And if you look at a map of America and where the wildfires are, it's pretty scary. And it's in a week or a few weeks where we've had devastating floods in China, devastating floods in Europe, some truly kind of awful stuff on the floods, which we were seeing in the media. And this is all what we were talking about last week with ESG. This drives much more of the sort of conscious awareness, if you like, of the climate change issue. And I just wanted to point out here just some of this, the scale of these fires, and this is kind of what the article focuses on. The Bootleg fire has burned more than 293,000 acres. And the Beckworth complex in Northern California fire has wiped out more than 105,000 acres. So this is, the article talks about lots of reasons and things. It's quite interesting, and to say that you've got to, some of it is man-made. It's not climate change. It's because of the way that the forests have been managed, which Trump actually complained about a lot. So utility companies are in for this, but the scale of the losses, if you're able to put the next chart up, Jay, I feel like Chris Whitty now. Next chart, please. The next chart shows that just shows the scale of the insured losses and how they've risen since 2011. Not a long period of time, and this is really, to me, quite scary. And I suspect there are similar issues over floods, but the losses now are big, and of course these are becoming uninsured losses. So the reason probably that we're getting drops a bit is because when they're not as there's not a capacity, and the insurers won't write these risks anymore. So combining all of this together, the questions, really big questions, are really about, is the insurance industry able to cover losses, pandemics, wildfires, floods, those sorts of things going forward, or does it do it in association with government, which is obviously being discussed at various, very high level governmental circles with insurers. So it's interesting, but it looks incredibly challenging. If you've got this sort of scale of increase, how can insurers, obviously they can't just keep paying out for something that's not a random loss. It's becoming systemic. Yeah,
and just to kind of follow on from that and back up the point being made, the German floods this week, looking at 4 to 5 billion euros, and they're huge numbers, aren't they? And they're making an impact. And just to kind of bring in the ESG element of this, I was listening to Radio 4 yesterday on the PM program, and they had a researcher on from one of the universities who were monitoring kind of the population's feelings towards climate change, and they're monitoring it over several years. And I think over the last 2 years, there's been a real shift in sentiment around, especially in the UK. Oh, there's some benefits to this, our climate warming up. We're going to have better summers, but the reality of it is extreme weather, which I think wasn't really put out there as strongly when they were putting their cases together. So I think there's been a shift in the sentiment in the population. That will obviously continue, not obviously continue, but I think it will continue, and that will push organizations. They'll have to respond to that because, as we said last week, customers and clients will want to know what organizations are doing to mitigate this stuff so that they are not contributing to climate change.
I think there's also a real sense of urgency, isn't there? And this is what John Kerry was saying in the week when he was over here, saying that it's not about whether we can resolve climate change. We probably can over a longer period of time, but we haven't got the time to do it. And what strikes you about all of this is there's so many things going on at the same time, and they're hitting us much more quickly than even the scientists predicted, if they are. That's another question too. But you've got then to say what are governments doing? For example, about in the UK about gas-fired boilers and all those sorts of things. And there's also all sorts of questions still about how you would do it and how you'd affect that, because there are costs and significant changes required. So many things going on at the same time, and yet the environment doesn't hang around. It's not waiting for us to make those decisions. So really, really key. And the insurance the insurance industry has a big part to play in this, according to everything that we read. So it's an opportunity for it to really start to step up on this sort of thing, and maybe build a bigger, better, more relevant industry, even more relevant industry in future.
Yeah, let's hope this is an opportunity rather than a threat. So that's good. Right. Thanks for that, Ben. So now move on to kind of our main feature today, which is an interview with Professor John Seddon. Now, this is an interview I first aired back in February as part of the TINTEC London Market conference. This opening clip, which is 5 or 6 minutes, just kind of tease up the conversation that we have. And I think we're going to play the whole interview next week, so next Friday, so you can tune in. But we're going to play this opening clip, then we're going to come back and just reflect on the 6 points that he raises in his introduction. So let me find the clip, which I should have done first. And right, here we go. I would like to start by just giving you the opportunity to introduce yourself. We've known each other for a number of years now and take part in the events, but perhaps you could just introduce yourself and some of the background work you've been doing.
Oh, yeah, I'm John Seddon. I run the Vanguard organisations. We're operating in 11 countries. We only do one thing. We help service organisations, or the leaders of service organisations, change their organisation from a conventional command and control design to a systems design. I was introduced to these ideas by W. Evans Deming, an American, who made the obvious point that humankind invented management. Current management doesn't work very well. We can change it, and we should run our organizations as systems. If you follow that route, you can typically, in a service organization, expect to get a massive ramp in customer satisfaction because it works better, much better for customers. And at the same time, a big drop in your operating costs, sometimes as much as 50%. So you would imagine that everyone will be doing it. Well, what stops people doing it is it's so counterintuitive. It really does fly in the face of all the things we believe about management as we've been taught by the command and control ideas, which actually, interestingly, the heart of which is budget management. And who invented budget management? There's a question for the audience, and the answer is a certain James McKinsey. But there we are. It's the central part of the disease, and I talk a lot about that in the book.
Yeah, indeed. The book you're referring to is Beyond Command and Control, which I think came out last year.
That's right.
And it's a great read. It's really good and expands on the original Command and Control thesis that you put out there. And it was around, forgive me or correct me if I get this wrong, but it was around initially the productivity gap or crisis in the UK that you started to look at command and control structures and strategies. Is that right?
Well, that's right. And in fact, I think the last chapter, in fact, I think they called it the epilogue in that book, was all about the productivity challenge. And I discuss what the UK government has been doing to try to improve productivity and talk about what needs to happen to improve productivity. But there's no doubt about it. If every service organisation in the land followed the methods that I talk about, we would have a dramatic rise in productivity.
Okay, so let's get into some of the detail then.
Yeah.
the kind of the widespread adoption of digital, I think you kind of question that approach. It seems to be back to front. How do you characterize it?
Well, you will know, Jeremy, I about 4 chapters in that book, all about what's happening with digital, agile, Scrum, and all of that malarkey. But, I would start actually by saying if you read The Economist, as I do, and not that I share their philosophy, but I read The Economist, and The Economist is unequivocal that despite the many years of investment and large investments in digitizing lots of different things, we have yet to see any impact on productivity. It's quite a different story if you listen to the big consultancies. But one of the things I think the audience maybe would like to hear from me is that I think there are about 6 common arguments that the big consultancies use, which are neither proven and indeed are false about why you should do digital services. Shall I run through them?
Yes, please. Why not?
Okay. And the first is that if you have digital services, you'll operate at lower costs. Well, that is true if a digital transaction works. But if a digital transaction doesn't work, and I'll explain why a lot of them don't a little later, actually your costs go up. The number of transactions goes up. So that's not necessarily true. They say that customers want digital access to all services. I don't think that's true. I think the most important thing that customers want is a service that works. They don't want the means, they want the result, this service that works. They also argue that customers want the insurance sector, for example, to be just like retail. But you're not like retail. You're not a retailer, and customers don't expect, for example, if I'm dealing with commercial insurance, my firms, I wouldn't expect that to be like buying a book on Amazon. Why would I expect that to be the case? I'm not stupid. They also argue that digital services will increase trust and loyalty, and that's not true. What decreases trust and loyalty are services that don't work. And I'll describe how that occurs with digital services a bit later. If they do work, you don't get much of a rise in trust and loyalty. It's a bit like money and work, Their fifth argument is that this will help you deal with the risks of new entrants. I don't think that's true. In fact, I don't think the new entrants are actually much of a risk, and we perhaps should talk about what I've learned from startups in the last couple of years later. And finally, their sixth argument is that others are doing really well with this, like Amazon and Spotify. But, you're not Amazon and you're not Spotify. Some ridiculous things I see in my life. We do a lot of work with housing repairs. They have warehouses. And they're persuaded by people to go on, a future vision tour or whatever they call it of the Amazon warehouses, because Amazon warehouses work in a different way from a lot of warehouses. And I just think it's such a stupid idea, because the problem you have to solve if you're dealing with housing materials is different to the problem that Amazon's got to solve. And indeed, when you understand the problem you've got to solve with housing materials is, let's make sure we only buy the stuff we're going to use and need. And when you do that, your warehouses empty out and your costs drop by about half. That is not a problem that Amazon has. You won't find a solution to that problem at Amazon. So, we are not all the same, and we really need to understand how our business works. So, but those are the common arguments you'll see from the big consultancies. And they're slightly inaccurate, let's be polite.
Good clip, that, isn't it? It's lots to kind of unpack and talk about in there.
Yeah.
And I agree with a lot of what he says, but I think when you delve into that terrible word, the nuances of the arguments, they start to fray at the edges, because I think it's a little bit of a narrow view perhaps of some of those things, but perhaps we can pick up on them. I certainly agree that a service has to work, and whether that's a digital service or any other way of receiving a service, it's got to work. Otherwise, you're going to be disappointed. I do think, though, around digital, that it is a driver for change, as well as giving organizations tools to be able to change what they're already doing, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's some powerful points for me. I mean, I think things that I would absolutely agree with, and I think they are, both warnings as well as a bit of railing against the traditional consultancy industry, which I think we all probably know tends to come in with an agenda, whatever that agenda might be, to win business and make profit. So that is the game of the consultants, and you'd expect that to be the case. I think when you look at what John is saying about some of the fundamentals, I can't at all, of course, and I've said it on here many times, disagree about the customer focus. I think, Steve Jobs said this as well, is that good businesses focus first on the customer, and then I think John says later on about digital comes last. That's an enabler of something. I think his other really powerful point is insurance is not like other businesses. It is in some ways, but if you start with with what a lot of people do in this industry is to say, oh, let's be like Google, let's be like Amazon, as he says, which does happen, it's true. You start in the wrong place. You don't really start by saying, what is our strategic challenge? What is the problem that faces us, or the challenge, and what do we do to sort that out? And usually you have to look at the customer and the value that you deliver. That's I've said before, that's a complex thing. I think I said a few weeks ago, it's not a straightforward thing. It's not just let's make it up and think about a piece of digital technology. So again, I take his point absolutely, that often it feels like you're doing something. It feels like you're sorting out a problem, but in actual fact, you have not asked the customer what they really want. So you end up doing this sort of technology-based stuff because you think you ought to, and because people in businesses are prepared to budget and pay for it because it makes them look good, but it doesn't really necessarily do what you want. So I think it's pretty vital to keep making those points. I think the point as well is that proven that digital hasn't brought much productivity improvement in financial services. I quoted this from Gartner a few years ago at the TIN conference saying, all that talk about blockchain at the time, nothing had been added according to Gartner in terms of value from blockchain to the insurance or the financial services industry globally. So it is absolutely right to say all the time, what are these technologies supposed to be bringing? So that's all to me well and good. I think the point, and it's John's only talking. He will, when you hear the full thing, it's 20 minutes. There's a lot more in it, and it's really good. And I'll definitely have a listen next week, and we'll talk about it a bit more in our show next week. But I think there is as you make the point, there is something else about technology that is, I think, more organic, if you like. And I think that technology isn't just about processes or systems or command and control. I think things happen with technology that are unintended, and I'll use just the smartphone and communications as an example. I always think communications and technology are really, really key. I don't think lots of other things about technology are very interesting or exciting in a way. I mean, the fact of a package being delivered quickly, the fact of, doing my bank account. John, again, is absolutely right. We've got it in our research data. It gets taken for granted really soon. We can see this in insurance, in the mid-market, and claims at the moment. There are claims portals, but brokers go, yeah, it's great, I use it. Does it have any impact on their experience, their service quality? No, but rationally you would say, well, they're getting things quicker and they're not. No, they're saying this only gives me the service I expect. It doesn't give me anything that's value add over and above what I want. It doesn't help me sell anything, for example. So that's really important. But I think when you get into things like communications and the ability of technology to help with communication, I think there is something really quite fundamental there. And I think that's where technology has had a massive impact, from the typewriter onwards. It's when it starts to be able to use language, and we know that AI is nowhere near yet, what humans can do, and never will be probably. But there are areas where it does seem to me it can be deployed and can help, and we change our behaviours as a result of the technology, not the other way around. So, and my other point is that it's not always about, much as I would advocate this, it's not always about getting some kind of holy truth about the customer. It's about getting some sort of angle on what the customer might want through things like research, using your nous, your common sense, and your knowledge of all sorts of other contextual factors, and then saying, so where might a piece of technology help this, or where might, and then you give it a go. I mean, the Japanese economy for years was very successful because it put more and more products out. Chinese do that to an extent now. They just churn loads of stuff out. If it doesn't work, they ditch it. They go to the next thing. So you can innovate in different ways. So I do think that there isn't just one way, but he makes some absolutely fundamental points, which I think apply to the insurance industry, which is we absolutely do need to understand the customer much better than we do.
Yeah. And just to come back to the point on productivity and just to bring it into the London market, what I think the key phrase that he uses is digitizing lots of stuff. And if you look in the London market, and you could probably look back to some of the failed attempts to bring technology into London and go, what they're trying to do is look at an existing process and go, right, how do we make that process electronic? Rather than rethinking it and saying, is this the right way to do it now that we have these things available to us? But the problem is, of course, once you take one step in that direction, it's very hard to then turn around and get back to that starting place where you're thinking about either re-engineering or throwing away processes or thinking about digitizing, not just making existing processes digital. Go on.
I was going to say, I think the other thing that I think is, I agree with all of that. I think the other thing that's really important is the cost of technology, because what he talks about is that digital can be expensive if you don't use it all, or you just go down the wrong path. That's kind of within a large company. But we were talking last week. There are the app world now, and the access of so many more people to develop businesses, entrepreneurial small businesses with apps that solve small problems, larger problems, and so on. That is an ideas generated thing using technology. So there is a human to technology interaction. It's coding or it's no code, but it's an ability for people who previously didn't have access to working in big companies and all the resources that they have. They can literally do it anywhere in the world in their bedrooms. So if you look at the music industry, how that's taking off. And yes, you can say Spotify doesn't pay musicians enough, but you can also say there's tons of people who make money off YouTube, and now increasingly specialist music sites where they curate their own things. So these are ideas. These are, but they're there partly because people have that technology, and I think just calling it digital is a bit old-fashioned now, because it isn't just digital. There's hardware that's cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. We know from running this show and the recording equipment and stuff, it's dead cheap. It's stuff that years ago would have cost you 100,000 or more, six-figure type sums, for £1,000 or £500 now. You can't believe how these things can be manufactured and made. So I think it's quite easy to underestimate just what this does. But I think when you're talking about institutional change, you've got to sort of think somewhat differently, I think, as well.
Yeah. And I think the only other thing that I would say about kind of his, let's just call it a rather narrow approach to kind of digital and services and productivity and things like that, is that there is a lens through which you can look at this from the employee and the experience. And we've talked about this on the show. In order to deliver that service to the client, you've got to have people, and they've got to have the right tools, and they've got to be engaged. And if they're trying to serve a customer using kit that is green screen or whatever else, it's going to be a clunky, poor experience, because that's just what they're dealing with, And if all the cogs in the don't want to word in the ecosystem. Don't really want to use that word, but you know what I mean. In the value chain, are using this outdated, rusty old technology, then the whole thing's going to feel clunky. And so there is an employee angle to this.
Yes, and someone said to me once, the thing that people don't understand about, for example, social media, is a conversation, not a one-way communication channel. And that's all of this sort of thinking. Once you turn it on its head, which a lot of perhaps younger people do, or people in the know do, they get what it is. Then it changes your view of what this is, because it's not just digital, it's not just technology. It happens to be digital because that's what we've invented. It's different ways of communicating more effectively and more efficiently. And so if you think of people working from home, but any technology really, people make the most of it in a way because it's there. They make the most of the smartphone, and then companies like Apple react to that because they realize what people are using. So they're testing a lot of this stuff out on the street. So it's not like you can always say that, that technology or digital comes late in the day, and it's not just one thing. And I just want to say one other point, which is I think productivity is often quite a controversial metric, and it's not one that, as far as I know, has always been well understood. It often goes counter to what economists expect and so on. You can get high productivity in places. The UK has had a persistent low productivity problem, but the economists simply cannot understand why that is. And John's contention, no doubt, is that it's part to do with companies not focusing on value and customers and things like that. And I think that is part of it, but I think it's part of it. I think there are more complex issues at play, which we've talked about before, like drive, ideas, culture, mindset. America has a fantastic, history of even when it's been down on its arse, it's got up again, and it just has this amazing drive because it's culturally how people are there. It's not to do with technology or metrics or productivity or systems. It's just people have a real drive. They want to do well. They want to better themselves. So I don't think you can't underestimate all these things. I think they're all they're kind of bigger, but it's good. And I think John's really good. He's not here to answer our slight critique of what he's saying. So, but on here, it would be great to get him on for a debate about some of these issues and see what he'd say. I'm sure he'd shoot us down in flames quite quickly.
I'm sure he's got a lot more experience than we have.
What do we know? We're not even professors.
No, I know. Professor of summer gear.
Yeah.
There we are. Right, good. Thanks, Ben. It was good. And as we said, we will play the whole of that interview next week, and you can listen, and we'll give a bit of commentary. But I might ping them an email and see whether they'd like to come on and debate some of that stuff with us. That'd be good. All right, what are you doing this weekend, Ben? Up to anything?
I'm going to have my tooth done in a minute, as you know. Start the great spend. The implant story will be told on this show, and the great reveal at some point. Right. So that's the start of it, and then I'm doing some cycling on Sunday and a bit of barbecue stuff action.
Excellent. Good. Yep. I am actually trying to go on holiday next week, so we'll see what happens. I'm driving up to see my parents in the northwest, so no doubt as soon as I arrive it'll start raining.
Lovely. And no, Lane, we're not on the juice already.
No. So, it's just tea.
Later.
Yeah, good. Right. Thanks always, Ben. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And we will see you next week.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.